And what I decided to do this week is go into one of the biggest stories that happened during the last weekend. Now, if you guys may recall, last week, the biggest thing that everybody has been talking about was Wonder Woman. Like, it was the only thing that has dominated social media, whether it be like on Facebook or Twitter. Everybody was pretty much talking about it. They were hyping up about it, and people got really excited and really happy about it because finally Wonder Woman came in and it became the first ever DC Cinematic Universe movie that is actually good, that can actually compete with Marvel, finally. And it pretty much taught us the huge lesson that if you really need to go and make a good movie, then you just bring in a woman. It takes a woman to go and make a good movie. Maybe make a better movie than men, actually. That is the biggest lesson that we got from DC Cinematic Universe this year. Nah, but anyways, with all that said though, of course the hype goes all into Wonder Woman. But then you have another movie that came out during the same time, which is Captain Underpants. And you don't really see a lot of people talking about it. In fact, at the box office, what ended up happening is that even though Wonder Woman did break new records and it became the highest grossing big budget movie that is directed by a woman, Captain Underpants, however, it just modestly was on the side, and it did manage to grab second place by only making $23 million. Now, with all that said, for an animated feature, that kind of does suck, and it basically just makes it a flop. There's no way that DreamWorks Animation could find money onto Captain Underpants at this point. So, yeah, sadly, Captain Underpants just became a bomb because it got overshadowed by Wonder Woman. Or is it? Because there's actually one thing about Captain Underpants that is actually highly fascinating that actually had some people talking about it. You see, unlike any other DreamWorks film, Captain Underpants actually has a rather intriguing budget, where the budget is actually just $38 million. $38 million for that movie. For an animated film, that is stupidly cheap. More cheap than any other mainstream animated feature that has been released so far. I kid you not. To give you a good comparison, The Boss Baby, another DreamWorks animation film, actually cost them $125 million. So just a reminder, The Boss Baby, $125 million. Captain Underpants, $38 million. That is legit a little bit more than a quarter of the Boss Baby's budget. But then again, you'll also have some people saying that Captain Underpants is 4 times better than the Boss Baby, but that's another story right over there. So yeah, how is it that Captain Underpants ended up having such a low budget? How is that even possible? Well, I'll tell you how. The reason why it actually became the cheapest DreamWorks animation movie ever made is actually because this is the first one ever that DreamWorks had to go outsource it. The animation was not actually done inside DreamWorks Animation. It was actually outsourced by Micros Images. This is an animation studio made in Montreal, Canada, so it's around my neck of the woods. And they were the ones who provided all the effects, all the lighting, and all the animation. While DreamWorks Animation in California, they were the ones responsible to do the main aspect. They were the ones responsible for the story, for the concept art, for the main aspects, for the core of Captain Underpants. And they left Micros to do the rest right over there. So that's how they ended up creating a low budget. But I will say, though, once you do think about it, it actually does make sense that Captain Underpants can be a relatively cheap movie to make. And what I mean by cheap, it's not like Hotel Transylvania, where, they have, millions of dollars, and it's just spent to look like a cheap little Saturday morning cartoon show. No. What I mean by cheap is that there are a lot of things that Captain Underpants has done in order to take away some of the cost-effective things that DreamWorks Animation would normally do. Like when you do think about like How to Train Your Dragon or Kung Fu Panda, it really doesn't do that much, really. Number one, though, is mainly because of the design of the characters. Now, the entire like production design and the entire look of Captain Underpants is meant to be reminiscent to the art style of Dave Pilkey in the original books that they were based on. And what Dave Pilkey did is very, very simple. Like, this is really simplistic animation that they have crafted there. So there's no necessary need to go and go extreme with the design to make them look highly realistic. You don't need to go and put in so many textures, or you don't have to make the eyes look realistic, like to give them irises and stuff like that. You just need to put in a line, and that's pretty much it. And even with a lot of the action scenes, like, you don't really get a lot of high-flying moments with Captain Underpants, or even one of the best examples, and this is a little bit of a spoiler inside Captain Underpants, is that there is one scene where Captain Underpants was ready to fight against the Turbo Toilet 2000, but then suddenly everything had to be stopped because George and Harold decided to represent the entire scene using Fliporama. So you see, like, all you do is just see them just flipping pages to show how the action is going on. And it actually really is funny. And it actually works because it is very reminiscent to how it is in the books. And you also see a little bit of satire on it, where there was at one point they ripped the pages, and then like George and Harold have a little bit of an argument about, it was like, why is it that you have dolphins? I like dolphins, man. Like, come on, it's just creative liberties. Okay, fine, just keep the dolphins. And there was at one point you just see Harold just standing up, and you see the whole page is like not entirely covered, but there's a part of it that actually has some shoe markings right over there. I thought it was really funny. But yeah, the whole point that I'm going with it is that Captain Underpants was cheap to make because the script didn't require too much to ask for it, because it does remain rather minimal. And even the effects themselves, like, they decided to go a little bit with the Peanuts movie route, where all the effects are rather cartoony in a sense, where you don't really see that much highly realistic water. It's kind of like the little splash marks, you know? It's just like the mixture of a cone with a sphere. And, like, you know, they do all these minimalistic takes and all these, like, cartoony actions where it doesn't need that big of a budget to go and create that film. So what ended up happening is that with the box office result of $23 to $24 million as an opening at the box office, it's not necessarily a flop. Like, DreamWorks Animation is still going to be finding ways to go and find some profit with Captain Underpants. They will still be able to go and make money. Now, if it were Trolls or The Boss Baby that actually started out with that, then yes, it would be a massive disaster for them. It would be a massive box office bomb, and sadly, they would have to restart it. And by the way, there is one more thing I forgot to mention, and that is actually regarding why they decided to do this, and that was actually back in the beginning of 2015, when disaster struck at DreamWorks Animation, and they pretty much had to really minimize their workforce. They had to shut down their Redwood division. Hundreds of artists and animators had to lose their jobs. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, the then CEO at the time, he had to find different ways to go and, you know, minimize like spending too much money. So one of the ideas was take Captain Underpants and go and outsource it. And here we are right now. This is the result that happened. And even though right now it's hard to really imagine that Captain Underpants is going to be making the same numbers as something like The Boss Baby, there will still be a chance that DreamWorks Animation can still find some profit because of its massively low budget. But one thing that is actually very interesting, though, is that you actually got articles like on Cartoon Brew or in the Hollywood Reporter that honestly they're kind of exaggerating this whole thing, thinking that this could actually be a massive game changer in the animation industry, where the headlines even say like Captain Underpants and the new pursuit of making cheaper animated movies. And then you got another one, the one on Cartoon Brew, written by Crazy Old Mid, that is written, Captain Underpants could dramatically alter the US feature animation industry. Okay, guys, calm the fridge down. No, it's not. It's like, honestly, that is way too much of a massive exaggeration. There is no way that this is going to be a game changer and this is going to be the new format of making animated features, period. Because let me just start out by saying that outsourcing animation is not a new concept. Like, this is actually a recent thing that animation studios are doing, but it's not really new. This is not the first time that we are seeing something like this happen. And there are some great examples, like Illumination Entertainment. Even the article in Hollywood Reporter actually did brought up that this is kind of a strategy that they have done ever since the very beginning, where where like the whole core of the movie is done inside America, but then the animation would be outsourced in Illumination MacGuff in France. So the entire animation process would be made in France, while all the main things like making the story, storyboards, concept, and all that kind of stuff is done in America. And the same thing can be pretty much said with Sony Pictures, and with Sony Pictures Animation, where the entire animation is actually done in Vancouver, Canada, in that division of Sony Pictures Imageworks, where earlier in this decade, Sony decided to move Sony Pictures Imageworks onto Vancouver so that making their movies would be a lot cheaper. Not just their animated films, but also the visual effects of movies. So at least they can find a more cost-effective way. So they ended up doing the same thing, that the core aspect is done in America, but then the animation itself is actually made in Canada. So what ends up happening is that nowadays, movies made by either Sony Animation or Illumination would end up costing around $60 to $80 million, around that range. Not necessarily as cheap as what we got with Captain Underpants, but it's still relatively a low budget for an animated feature. It's still less expensive than something that Dreamworks or Pixar would spend onto an animated film. And of course, this is not the first time that something like Captain Underpants in general happened. As you guys may know, last year, one of the most extreme examples is actually with Sausage Party, where you actually have an animated film that ends up costing $19 million. Like, for an animated film, that is insane to think about, that anyone could actually make like something that could be at least more than an hour and come out with something like that. It really is such an insane estimate. But hold on a sec. I just want to go onto Box Office Mojo, and I want to take a look a little bit onto what was the what would be the budget. Hold on. Well, not the budget, but what I'm looking at is just how much did it make at the box office. And apparently, Sausage Party ended up making a total of $140 million. Now, for any other animated feature, that is immediately announced as a flop. Like, it is a disaster. However, because of its relatively low budget of $19 million, Sony Pictures did find a way to actually make a profit. It actually did turn out to be a success. Now, like I said before, though, this is a rather extreme example. Like, I don't think any other studio should copy what Sausage Party did and just make a movie out of $19 million, especially with the whole massive controversy that went behind it, and that's another entire story right there. So that's kind of the big thing, is that studios nowadays are in a bit of a pursuit to find cheaper alternatives to create animated films. And like we got stuff like Captain Underpants and Sausage Party, where even though they don't really make a lot at the box office, but because of their low budget, they're still finding ways to actually make a profit. So it is actually working out for it. And even with Captain Underpants, when you do think about it, it is actually made perfectly for that scenario right there. Because let's face facts, there is no way in hell that Captain Underpants would be able to surpass Wonder Woman at the box office. Like, financially, Wonder Woman pretty much got it to a T. Even if it turned out to be as bad as Suicide Squad and Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, it would still be able to surpass Captain Underpants at the box office. But Captain Underpants already has a low budget, so it's perfectly fine. The important thing for it to do is to just, remain calm and just stay on the sidelines in order to have a bit of profit on the side. In a way, it's actually very similar to Sing in a sense, where even though the budget is a little bit bigger than Captain Underpants with around 75 million, it actually never made it into the top of the box office. Like, it never made it up to number one because it was battling against Rogue One, a Star Wars story. But Illumination still found a way to make a massive profit out of it. So that could pretty much be the case. So the big question is, to answer what Hollywood Reporter and what Cartoon Brew is asking, is it possible that this could be a big game changer in the animation industry? Not really. It is possible that we will be seeing a little bit more of movies like this, but I'm not saying that this is going to be something that will entirely be a whole new chapter in the animation industry in general. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Because here's the thing. A lot of these studios already have their own strategies on how to make an animated film, and they're pretty much sticking to it. You got Disney and Pixar, which they are the ones who would make the most expensive animated films nowadays, which can range with a budget of $150 to even $200 million, but they're perfectly fine with it because they're still finding ways to make massive profits. I mean, other than Minions, Disney is the one that actually has all the movies that surpassed $1 billion at the box office. Movies like Toy Story 3, Frozen, what else was there? Zootopia, even Finding Dory. Now, I'm not saying that this is a perfect strategy, and yes, with The Good Dinosaur, it was a moment that showed that it can have some consequences when the plan doesn't work. But the thing is that usually they're perfectly fine with spending all that money onto their movies and to go crazy with the marketing. And even with what I've already mentioned with Illumination Entertainment, they're already in the process of being one of the biggest animation studios that could even compete with Disney. So they don't really need to change their ideas. Like, they've already got their own little plan by making movies that are between like $60 to $80 million and go and find ways to be creative with the marketing and end up with massive profits. And like I said, other than Disney, Minions actually surpassed $1 billion. But I will say, however, for this strategy right over here, I can think of a couple of companies that would benefit from this. And those are the ones that are struggling and also the ones that are starting. Like, for the ones that are struggling, of course, like, Dreamworks Animation is an example of a studio that for a while have really struggled to the point that, they had to be bought out by NBC Universal. So that is an example right over there that they got to go and do something like this in order to go and produce more for less. So at least they can still deliver a lot more animated features, but they don't have to spend as much as they normally do. Another example of a company that would do this, and are actually doing this is Sony Pictures Animation. Like right now, you could definitely tell that they are struggling. Smurfs the Lost Village is not necessarily doing well at the box office, and obviously frickin' Emoji Movie is on its way to become a frickin' box office disaster. Depending on how much Sony Animation is spending on that film, who knows. Like, if it ends up being a high budget, like, even if it's, like, $80 million or more, like, my god, you'll definitely see Sony losing so much money from the Emoji Movie right over there. But the thing is that they are actually going to be doing it with The Star. Now, that's going to be coming out close to the release date of Coco, and with that one, it's the same thing with Captain Underpants. The core aspect is actually going to be made at Sony in California, while the animation is going to be provided by Cinesite in Montreal, Canada. Same thing. So they are pretty much doing the same kind of strategies. And as for the ones that are starting, I can imagine companies like Netflix, who really want to go and enter into the animation industry, they would bring in something like The Little Prince, which, is not that expensive to make, and especially would mix in several different mediums. They would go and create that. So that's pretty much why I'm saying that we're not going to really see a lot of it. We're not going to see a big change in the animation industry to where everybody's going to be like that, considering the fact that they already have their own format in order to make their animation studios fine enough right over there. But also, the reason why they're really not doing it is mainly because of the script. It's mainly because the movie should not really offer too much in order to go and have a low budget. Kind of like the same way as Captain Underpants or even Sausage Party in a way. The script doesn't heavily demand it so that it needs to do a lot visually in order to go and create an animated film. So that's kind of the big thing. It is an interesting talk to see how Captain Underpants can still be rather successful, but it's not going to leave that big of an impact in the animation industry where everybody's going to have a desperate need to go and make animated features that could cost less than $40 million. So I just want to go and clarify on that. But it definitely is an interesting thinking piece. It definitely is an interesting discussion to have among the animation community, It is something interesting to think about.